Welcome again to the lectures on stylistics. The lecture is being delivered specially for the students studying at the Department of English and German Languages. The theme of this lecture is Syntactic Stylistic Devices, Patterns of Syntactical Arrangement. Within this lecture, we will consider the following points. First of all, we'll talk about classification of syntactical stylistic devices, and then consider in more detail stylistic devices that are in the group of patterns of syntactical arrangement, such as inversion, detached constructions, parallel construction, chiasmus, repetition, enumeration, antithesis, and suspense. Within the language as a system, they establish themselves certain definite types of relations between words, word combinations, sentences, and also between larger spans of utterances. The branch of language science, which studies the types of relations between the units enumerated, is called syntax. In the domain of syntax, it is difficult to distinguish between what is purely grammatical, that is marked as corresponding to the established norms, and what is stylistic. This is particularly evident when we begin to analyze larger than the sentence units. Generally speaking, the examination of syntax provides a deeper insight into the stylistic aspect of utterances. Stylistics takes as the object of its analysis the expressive means and stylistic devices of the language, which are based on some significant structural point in an utterance, whether it consists of one sentence or a string of sentences. According to Galperin, syntactical stylistic devices fall into the following groups. First, patterns of syntactical arrangement, within which we can point out the following stylistic devices: inversion, detachment, parallelism, chiasmus, repetition, enumeration, suspense, climax, antithesis. Next, peculiar linkage, colloquial constructions, and stylistic use of structural meaning. In this lecture, we will consider the first group of syntactical stylistic devices. Word order is a very important syntactical problem in many languages, particularly in English, since it has fixed word order. Stylistic inversion, if we simply put it, is a reversed word order. Any change which doesn't influence the meaning but is only aimed at emphasis is called a stylistic inversion. In spite of fixed word order, which is characteristic to the English language, inversion should not be regarded as a violation of the norms of standard English. This stylistic device aims at attaching logical stress or additional emotional coloring to the surface meaning of the utterance. Typical example of the stylistic inversion, also often called locative inversion, is in the following examples. Into the room walked a woman. For your gods are not gods, but man-made idols. The following patterns of stylistic inversion are most frequently met in both English prose and English poetry. The attribute is placed after the word it modifies. With fingers weary and worn. The predicate is placed before the subject. For instance, a good generous prayer it was. The adverbial modifier is placed at the beginning of the sentence. For example, my dearest daughter, at your feet I fall. The next stylistic device is detached constructions. Sometimes one of the secondary members of the sentence is placed so that it seems formally independent of the word it refers to. Being formally independent, this secondary member acquires a greater degree of significance and is given prominence by intonation. For example, she was gone, For good. I want to go, he said, miserable. If not for the comma in this sentence, grammatically, as you notice, miserably adverb is expected. The pause indicated by the comma implies that miserable is adjective and refers to the pronoun he. Another example is, she was lovely, all of her delightful. Here again, the punctuation mark plays an important role. The dash standing makes the word conspicuous, and being isolated becomes the peak of the utterance. Now let's pay attention to some more examples. June stood in front, fending off this idle curiosity. A little bit of the thing, as somebody said, all hair and spirit. According to Galperin, the essential quality of detached construction lies in the fact that the isolated parts represent a kind of independent whole thrust into the sentence or placed in a position which will make the phrase or word seem independent. But a detached phrase cannot rise to the rank of a primary member of the sentence. It always remains secondary from the semantic point of view, although structurally it possesses all the features of a primary member. This clash of the structural and semantic aspects of detached constructions produces the desired effect, forcing the reader to interpret the logical connections between the component parts of the sentence. Logical ties between them always exist in spite of the absence of syntactical indicators. Stylistic parallel constructions may also be known as parallel structure or parallelism. In grammar, parallelism is a balance of two or more similar words, phrases, or clauses. The application of parallelism in sentence construction improves writing style and readability. The necessary condition in parallel construction is identical or similar syntactical structure in two or more sentences or parts of a sentence in close succession. For example, there were real silver spoons to stir the tea with, and real china cups to drink it out of, and plates of the same to hold the cakes and toast in. Parallel construction is used in different styles of writing with different functions. In poetry and prose, it carries an emotive function. Stylistic parallelism is often achieved with other stylistic principles, such as antithesis, anaphora, climax, etc. The next stylistic device within this group is chiasmus. Chiasmus is based on repetition of syntactical patterns, but it has a reversed order in one of the utterances. It is based on inverted parallelism. I flee who chases me, and chase who flees me. Fair is foul, and foul is fair. Your manuscript is both good and original, but the part that is not original and the part that is original is not good. I have taken more out of alcohol than alcohol has taken out of me, by Winston Churchill. The value of marriage is not that adults produce children, but that children produce adults. The ancient Hebrew and Greek texts of the Old and New Testaments are rich in chiasmus. Many of these have become lost in translation, but hundreds of others remain. The following examples are indented to show the parallel structure of the text. But many that are first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Repetition is just the simple repetition of a word within a sentence or a poetical line with no particular placement of the words. This is such a common literary device that it is almost never even noted as a figure of speech. Still, there are various types of repetition. Let's consider the most popular of them. Anadiplosis is the repetition of the last word of a preceding clause. The word is used at the end of a sentence and then is used again at the beginning of the next sentence. For instance, this, it seemed to him, was the end of the world as he had known it. So the word "and" is repeated at the end of the first clause and then at the beginning of the second clause. The longer life, the more offense. The more offense, the greater pain. The greater pain, the less defense. Anaphora is the repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of every clause. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. Epiphora, also known as epistrophe, is the repetition of a word or phrase at the end of every clause. What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny compared to what lies within us. It's a kind of antonym for anaphora. So the word us is repeated at the end of every clause. And there is one more interesting type of repetition called morphological repetition. For example, there were Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, and other is in the room. So here just part of a word is, this is suffix, is repeated. Enumeration. Enumeration is a syntactical stylistic device which separates things, properties, or actions brought together and form a chain syntactically in the same position, one and the same parts of speech. One may conclude that there should be observed certain semantic homogeneity as well. Most phenomena, things, objects, actions, etc., which are enumerated, have some kind of relations with each other. According to Galperin, in fact, it's the associations plus social experience that have resulted in the formation of what is known as semantic fields. Enumeration as a stylistic device may be conventionally called a sporadic semantic field. Here we are providing an example from Childe Harold's Pilgrimage by George Byron. There Harold gazes on a work divine, a blending of all beauties, streams and dells, fruit, foliage, crag, wood, cornfield, mountain, vine, and chiefless castles breathing stern farewells. From grey but leafy walls where ruin greenly dwells. Another example is from the work by John Galsworthy. Fleur's wisdom in refusing to write to him was profound, for he reached each new place entirely without hope or fever, and could concentrate immediate attention on the donkeys and tumbling bells, the priests, pashers, beggars, children, crowning cocks, sombreros, cactus hedges, old high white villages, goats, olive trees, grinning plains, sitting birds in tiny cages, water cellars, sunset, melons, mules, great chariots, pictures, and swimming gray-brown mountains of a fascinating land. The enumeration presented above is used as a device to depict scenery through a tourist's eyes. According to Galperin, the various elements of this enumeration can be approximately grouped in semantic fields. The first, donkeys, mules, crowing cocks, goats, singing birds. The second, priests, beggars, children, water sellers. The third, villages, pages, cactus hedges, churches, tumbling bells, sombreros, pictures. And the fourth, sunsets, swimming gray-brown mountains, greening plains, olive trees, melons. John Galsworthy found it necessary to arrange them not according to logical semantic centers, but in some other order. In one which apparently would suggest the rapidly changing impressions of a tourist. The parts of the enumeration can be likened to the strokes of a painter's brush, who, by an inimitable choice of colors, presents to our eyes an unforgettable image of the life and scenery of Spain. Antithesis. Antithesis is a syntactic stylistic device based on the author's desire to stress certain qualities of the thing by appointing it to another thing, possessing antagonistic features. It is the juxtaposition of contrasting ideas, usually in a balanced way. For example, they speak like saints and act like devils. We should distinguish between the two notions, contrast and antithesis. Some theorists use them as absolute synonyms. But contrast is a literary device, not linguistic, which is based on logical opposition between the phenomena set one against another. The next stylistic device is suspense. Suspense is a compositional device which is realized through the separation of the predicate from the subject by deliberate introduction between them of a clause or a sentence. Suspense is a feeling of uncertainty and anxiety about the outcome of certain actions, most often referring to an audience's perceptions in a dramatic work. It is not exclusive to fiction, though, and may operate in any situation where there is a lead-up to a big event or dramatic moment, with tension being a primary emotion felt as part of the situation. An audience expects something bad to happen because they have or believe they have a superior perspective on events in the drama's hierarchy of knowledge. Yet, they are powerless to intervene to prevent it from happening. Alfred Hitchcock, who is called the master of suspense, once wrote, "Terror is often accompanied by a suspense in the unfolding of a thrilling narrative, or, to put it another way, a story which gives the reader a feeling of terror necessarily contains a certain measure of suspense." One of the critics says that, known throughout the years as the master of suspense, Hitchcock kept viewers on the edge of their chairs with tales of mystery, murder, and mayhem. In literature, suspense is a compositional device which is realized through the separation of the predicate from the subject by deliberate introduction between them of a clause or a sentence. Thus, the reader's interest is held up. This device is typical of oratorical style. For example, "Mankind," says a Chinese manuscript, which my friend was obliging enough to read and explain to me, "for the first 70,000 ages ate their meat raw." Sentences of this type are called periodic sentences or periods. Their function is to create suspense, to keep the reader in a state of uncertainty and expectation. So that is all in brief concerning the content of this lecture. As usual, you are provided with a list of comprehension questions. In addition to this, as a rule, you are provided with a list of sources for your further reading. Thank you for attention.